Welcome to the Stereoactive Movie Club. My name is Jeremiah, and I am here with Alicia, Mia, and Stephen. Unfortunately, Laura's not able to join us for this episode. And for those who may not have listened to the show before, this is a podcast where we discuss movies that have appeared on Sight and Sound Magazine's poll of the greatest movies ever made. The poll comes out every 10 years, and the latest one just came out on Thursday, December 1st, 5 days ago now from when we're recording today. So normally we start off the show by hearing from everyone about one film they've watched since the last time we recorded. But how about this time we'll go around and everyone tells us as best as they can remember what their first quick reaction or thought was when they saw the new critics and directors list. Like, what was your feeling about it? Like, did you have a reaction in your head? Like, can you tell us how you felt? And let's start with Stephen.
Well, my reaction was, I was really kind of shocked because first of all, I hadn't heard of the first movie before at all, like anywhere. And second, I thought it was like, oh, it's not Citizen Kane or it's not Vertigo. So it kind of intrigued me to read more about it. So that was my first reaction.
Okay. And Alicia?
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised with just like the list overall. There were a lot of newer films and a much more diverse roster of filmmakers on there. So I was really happy to see that. And then I also was like confused because I was like, wait a minute, is this even the name of a movie? I was like, am I looking at the right thing? When I saw the number one movie, I thought, I never heard of it. I just thought it was like reading a new article or something when I first saw it.
All right. And Mia?
I mean, yeah, similar to Stephen and Alicia, I was very excited to see newer films on the list, especially the way the website was loading. It started at the end, which was like Get Out and Parasite and a lot of newer movies that we've talked about hoping would be on the list. And then I'd never heard of the first film. So I was also just like, whoa, like way out of left field curveball here. So, which was exciting. And obviously I was excited once I realized that it was a female director. I was very excited for that since that was a first.
Yeah, and I think a combination or overlap or whatever of everything you guys have said. I was both surprised and confused in different measures. I was surprised that there was such a shakeup, especially in the top 10, and just like scanning through the full 100, it looked like there were so many movies that I was pretty sure had not been on the list or as high on the list previously, and some of them, which we'll get to, have been made since the last time the list came out 10 years ago. And then, yeah, that number one, we'll get to it in more detail in a little bit, but like my reaction to that was like, okay, because it was a title of a movie that I've seen before, but literally knew next to nothing about. Like so it was just surprising that after the film canon being defined by this list of the greatest film being Citizen Kane forever, then Vertigo for one shot 10 years ago, that all of a sudden the so-called greatest film ever made was a movie that I knew nothing about, really. And it's kind of like freeing in a way, you know? It's like, oh, I get to learn something. So I don't know. I looked on the bright side of it if there needed to be one, which I'm not sure there needed to be. But okay. So let's get into the details a bit more. Here's how Sight and Sound quickly summarizes poll itself in their own intro to the list on their website. In 1952, the Sight and Sound team had the novel idea of asking critics to name the greatest films of all time. The tradition became decennial, increasing in size and prestige as the decades passed. The Sight and Sound poll is now a major bellwether of critical opinion on cinema, and this year's edition, its 8th, is the largest ever, with 1,639 participating critics, programmers, curators, archivists, and academics each submitting their top 10 ballot. And I should point out that this is talking specifically about the critics poll, and we'll get more into all that in a little bit. All right, so on this podcast, we've generally only covered movies that have at one time appeared in the top 10 or as a runner-up. So let's go ahead and just name check all the movies that did make the top 10 of the critics poll this time first. Mia, do you want to start us off?
So at number 10, we have Singin' in the Rain, which has been in the top 10 before and is now back, which I love. Released in 1951 from the US, directed by Jeanne Kelly and Stanley Donen. At number 9 is Man with a Movie Camera, released in 1929 from the USSR, directed by Dziga Vertov. Number 8 is Mulholland Drive, released in 2001 as a co-production of France and the US, directed by David Lynch.
Number 7 is Beau Travail, released in 1998 from France, directed by Claire Denis. Number 6 is 2001, A Space Odyssey, released in 1968 as a co-production of the US and UK, directed by Stanley Kubrick. Number 5 is In the Mood for Love, released in 2000 as a co-production of Hong Kong and France, directed by Wong Kar-wai.
Number 4 is Tokyo Story, released in 1953 from Japan, directed by Yasujiro Ozu. Number 3 is Citizen Kane, released in 1941 from the US, directed by Orson Welles. Number 2 is Vertigo, released in 1958, also from the US, directed by Alfred Hitchcock.
And number 1 is Jeanne Dielman, and that's the abbreviated title, of course. Released in 1975 as a co-production of Belgium and France, directed by Chantal Akerman. And by the way, the runner-up at number 11 was Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, released in 1927 from the US, directed by F.W. Murnau. And now the director's poll, which, because of ties, actually includes 11 films. Mia?
So tied at number 9 are 3 movies. Close Up, released in 1989 from Iran, directed by Abbas Kiarostami. Persona, released in 1966 from Sweden, directed by Ingmar Bergman. And In the Mood for Love.
Number 8 is Mirror, released in 1975 from the USSR, directed by Andrei Tarkovsky. And tied for number 6 are 8½, released in 1963 as a co-production of Italy and France, directed by Federico Fellini, and Vertigo.
Tied at number 4 are Jeanne Dielman and Tokyo Story. Number 3 is The Godfather, released in 1972 from the US, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. Number 2 is Citizen Kane, and number 1 is 2001, A Space Odyssey.
And the runners-up in the director's poll, tied at number 12, are Barry Lyndon, released in 1975 as a co-production of the US and UK, directed by Stanley Kubrick, and Taxi Driver, released in 1976 from the US, directed by Martin Scorsese. To give a sense of how the lists have changed in 10 years, on the critics' poll, 5 of the top films in the top 10 were not there in 2012. Of those 5, 4 never have been. Then of those 4, 3 are more recent than any film that's ever been in the top 10. Also, worth noting, 2 women have films in the top 10 now, while no woman has ever been in the top 10 before. The top film this time, Jeanne Dielman, was at number 35 in 2012, just to give a sense of how much it moved up in 10 years. On the director's poll, 3 films are new to the top 10. Of those 3, 2 are more recent than any film that's ever been in the top 10. And 1 woman now has a film in the top 10. Also, I believe, a first. The top film this time, 2001, was tied for second in 2012. And so that means the pool of movies we previously had to choose from for this podcast was 51, based on our criteria of them either being in the top 10 or a runner-up. So looking at the previous 8 decades, now that's up to 57. And those new ones are Jeanne Dielman, In the Mood for Love, Barry Lyndon, Close Up, Beau Travail, and Mulholland Drive. So, Mia, which of those have you seen already?
So I have seen Mulholland Drive and In the Mood for Love. And then since the list was released last week, Jeremiah and I watched Jeanne Dielman, but I was not aware of it before this list. So I only watched it because of this.
And Steven?
I unfortunately have not seen any that are on this list. So,
Okay. Alicia?
I've seen In the Mood for Love and Mulholland Drive.
All right. And I had seen Mulholland Drive and Barry Lyndon in The Mood for Love. And then, as Mia said, we watched Jeanne Dielman because it was number 1 on this. So now I've seen that as well. So I never saw Close Up and I never saw Beau Travail. I'm just going back. Has any of us seen Close Up or Beau Travail? I don't think anyone here had, right?
No.
I hadn't.
Okay. So Now expanding out to the full 100, there's a lot more change throughout. And I'm going to borrow some stats compiled by Kevin B. Lee on Twitter, and I believe he is a film professor. And yeah, so the highest debuts. So these are the movies that were new to the critics list. And all these stats, I think, are pertain to the critics list, not the director's list. So that's what we're talking about here for a little while. So the highest debuts again. Cleo from 5 to 7 came in at 14. Meshes of the Afternoon at 16. Do the Right Thing at 24. Daisies at 28. Portrait of a Lady on Fire at 30. Killer of Sheep at 43. Wanda at 48. The Piano at 50. News from Home at 52. The Apartment at 54. Daughters of the Dust at 60. And also Moonlight at 60. So a tie there. There's a lot of ties in these lists, by the way, for anybody who hasn't looked at them. So get used to that. But I don't know. Does anybody want to comment on these films that are all completely new to the list this time?
I was really happy to see Moonlight on there because I think I've mentioned a few times in the Facebook group that was going to be probably one of my choices for one that I thought should be on there. And Do the Right Thing, I'm excited to see, and The Piano and The Apartment. I mean, these are all seem really good. I don't know. I'm not familiar with really any of the other ones, but I was kind of going through the list the other day in preparation for this, and Daisies looked interesting, and where's the other one? Cleo from 5 to 7, that looked interesting. So I'm excited to have some new things to watch.
Yeah, I think Cleo from 5 to 7 is an Agnes Varda film, and she, I think, got a lot of late in life recognition in recent years. She had a movie that was nominated for a documentary Oscar a few years back now, and I feel like that put her back on the radar, and newly on the radar for a lot of people who were younger and may not have been as familiar with her work, because she was part of like the French New Wave, one of the female film directors that was part of that, and a very influential one. And yeah, so I think it was great to see something from her up there. I was definitely surprised to see Portrait of a Lady on Fire just 3 years after it was released come in at number 30. That's a very strong showing for, I think, any movie just entering the list, but especially such a new movie. I was really happy to see Do the Right Thing finally be on the list. I kind of almost wish it would have been higher, but it's nice that it was on there at least. Yeah. Mia or Steven, do you have any thoughts?
I'm happy to see The Apartment just because there's not very many comedies that are on the list, and that was definitely one that really
good point
made a dent for me, and I saw that on the big screen for the first time a couple of years ago, and it was quite an experience. And then also with Do the Right Thing, I feel like Spike Lee has kind of been forgotten by a lot of critics, so I think it's really great to have him on the list as well.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I haven't seen Daughters of the Dust, but it's been on my list to see it. It's the story of a family on the Gullah Islands in South Carolina. And when Beyonce made Lemonade, her visual album, apparently this movie was a big inspiration for a lot of the visuals. So I've just wanted to see it since then. So I'm excited that it's on here.
Yeah, and I think there was a fresh remaster re-release of that in recent years too, that like I always assume that plays a part in these lists of like new availability or wider availability must play a key part in some movies entering the list, especially when they've been out for a while and weren't on the list previously, you know. Which I'm not saying that. Yeah, sure. The Beyonce bump helped, I'm sure. I did want to mention Kevin B. Lee, who we're getting all these stats from. He did mention in his thread with all this stuff on Twitter pertaining to The Apartment, since you brought it up, Steven, that I'll just read it. He says, here's a theory on why The Apartment rose so high and why Billy Wilder is now the second most prominent Hollywood director on the poll behind Hitchcock. He is the auteur whose qualities are most relevant to TV series, screenwriting and dialogue, character, and a hard-edged sensibility. So I think that's an interesting observation, and I buy it, just off the cuff anyway. What do you guys think?
Mad Men is like almost directly pulled from The
Sure.
Apartment.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
A more dour version, but sure.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of the same elements are there big time.
Yeah, totally.
And I want to say about The Apartment that Steven and I went to see that with some friends on the big screen in Brooklyn, and we went out afterwards for dirty martinis, and it was like the perfect apartment viewing experience. Everyone should
really
do that
was.
sometime in their
Sounds
life.
amazing.
Yeah.
It was really
Yeah,
fun.
we watched that, like a
beat it.
year or so ago, Mia?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe
Probably
even
more
more.
than a year ago now.
Yeah, it might have been when we lived in that apartment. So like that was over 2 years ago. I don't remember. But
It was
anyway.
time.
Yeah.
Can we actually, Jeremiah, can you talk a bit about how the voting for this works? Because I think it's important that people know that it's just you get to choose 10 movies and rate them, but you're not necessarily ranking them. I think that explains the ties
Right.
and explains how movies could jump so much.
Yeah. So my understanding on this, and don't like hold me to it, like I probably should have done a little more research on this, but like I'm pretty sure that the way the list is compiled is they send these ballots out to all the people they invite to participate, whether they're critics, other people in the industry who vote in that list, or directors who vote in that list. And they're just told, list your 10 favorite films. And I don't believe there is any ranking to it. I think it's just like a listing of it, a mention equals a vote. And so if you see that a film has, I don't know, like 200 mentions, that means 200 people had it on their lists. That's all it means. There's no waiting for a rank. You know, it's not like if somebody, in some polls, like I think like the old Paz and Jop poll or whatever it was called from Village Voice, like they did it like where if you gave a ranked list, maybe like the number 1 movie got 10 points and the number 10 movie got 1 point. And, you know, so like the amount of love you had for a movie weighed in on the decision or the balance of the score for a movie. And that's not the way this is. So I do think it like that does account for like why some movies like move up a lot or why there are so many ties, I guess, because one mention equals 1 point, so to speak. And it doesn't even necessarily mean that like Jeanne Dielman or any other movie, wherever it falls on the list, is anyone's favorite movie. It could very well be that like however many people voted for Jeanne Dielman, none of them would put this number 1 if they were ranking it. I'm sure some of them would, probably a lot of them would, but just in this thought experiment, maybe no one does, but it still ends up as the number 1 movie because it was mentioned that many times, which I think is an interesting thing about this, I guess. What do you guys think of that process? Like, I guess we've never really explored that as much as we've talked about the list in the past. And I don't feel like we've ever gone super deep on all the intricacies of the list. So this has never come up, but like, what do you guys think?
To be honest with you, I never even thought about how it was ranked or scored. So that was kind of interesting to me. And then also I was thinking that there must have been some sea change for them to completely get this movie catapulted to number 1. So is it just there's more critics now, or they're different critics, or, you know, so I was thinking about that as well when I was thinking about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's more and different. I think that both of those pertain or how you would qualify it. Like, I think they invited different voices to be a part of the conversation. And like, that's going to change the makeup of your list if you change the makeup of the voters or the participants, you know? So yeah, I mean, I think that people who do know about this movie, unlike us before Thursday, really, like knew of it as a movie that was groundbreaking, Jeanne Dielman, I'm speaking of, for like being a feminist work.
I think it's interesting. I mean, I wish we had a time machine and could go back to the first one, because I do wish we'd clarified this at the beginning, both for ourselves and for our listeners. Just because I just assumed it was people submit a ranked list, and, you know, maybe every single person who votes doesn't rank every single film, or, you know, doesn't do all 100, but I guess I assumed it was ranked. And I guess it's just interesting because, you know, Citizen Kane, Vertigo, these other movies are regarded as the best movies or, the greatest films of all time. And yeah, but also it's a bunch of people who aren't necessarily saying that this movie is the greatest film of all time, if that makes sense. So
Right.
it's just different. And I think it shows when you have something like that how, I don't know what all these new critics and other folks that were added this year, but, if they were organizing amongst themselves for a shakeup, I can see how you could overtake this pretty easily.
Mm-hmm. Alicia, did you have thoughts?
Yeah, I think I just never had any idea how the voting worked at all. I never really thought about it either. I mean, I knew they polled critics and directors and that they compiled the information, but I just never thought about the process of how they came up with the rankings. But I think it makes, I understand it. I think it makes sense. I do think maybe having people rank them would lead to a better idea of what people actually do consider the best. But at the same time, I'm cool with the way things came out this year. And I do think maybe doing it this way does lead to more diversity in the top 10 and just the list overall. So I think that's good. But you guys said that there was a big jump in the number of people they polled from between 2002 to 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And then they doubled that again between 2012 and 2022. Is that what they did?
Yeah, in 2002, at least for the critics poll, it was, I think, 145 people, and then they went up to 800 something.
Okay.
Yeah,
and then this time they went up to 1,600 something.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they increased the number so much, and I assume not just the number, but the type of people they were asking in response to criticisms of the poll of being, too white, too male, too old, probably too Eurocentric, or Euro US centric as well.
Yeah.
But I'm just fascinated by this, and I don't know what the answer is, and I'm sure someone who has studied this a lot more than I have has done some sort of analysis online of why wasn't there a huge change in 2012 then, like what we're seeing right now? And maybe there was, maybe it wasn't as big of a change, but maybe it was a step forward that when we started looking at this in 2020 just maybe didn't seem as much of a step forward, and the world has obviously changed a lot in the last 10 years. And I think the pressures of, Black Lives Matter and Me Too and just all the social movements that have happened the last few years obviously could have a bigger impact on the list and on the people selecting films.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just like the mental image of all the female critics being okay, we're all writing this, right? You're writing this down, right? Okay. And going with that.
I do think I do feel like maybe the critics were trying to be more intentional with their choices this time. And I'm okay with that. I feel like same thing you were saying. When I first saw the list, I was like, wow, I think the political climate of the last, not even 10 years, but even just the last 5 years really made people think a lot more about which movies they were putting on their ballot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to Mia's point, I do think that it was viewed in 2012 as the top 10 didn't change much. They went through all this trouble of expanding the pool from 145 participants in 2002 to 846 in 2012. And also, I think, really trying to diversify the types of voices they were bringing in. And still, the top 10 looked like largely how it had, except for Vertigo being at the top. And the movie that was new to the top 10 was a 1927 Soviet silent film instead of a film that you would think younger critics would have voted in, So I do remember there being a sense in 2012 of wait, what? Because of that happening. But I think if you maybe looked at the full 100, I wonder, I don't have that in front of me. I don't know the numbers there, but I wonder if the full 100 seemed more progressive, if you want to use that word, from 2002 to 2012. And then I think it just, they like we've already said, they went from 846 in 2012 to 1639 in 2022. And yeah, it's like a lot of shakeups, not just in the top 10, but in the full 100, as we've already been discussing. Yeah.
I think it's also the same thing as the Academy Awards. It seems like even over the past 5 to 10 years, the Best Picture winners have not been the typical ones that you'd always see. So I think there probably was a concerted effort to kind of like, we need to shake things up a little bit to be relevant, because I think a lot of people probably looked at this list and said, oh, it's the same people. Like me, for example. I mean, I looked at it and I was completely surprised to see like the different movies that were in the top 10. So I feel like that's probably part of what they were thinking.
Yeah. I mean, having watched this list for 20 years, like the 2002 one was like the first one where I was like of an age to be aware of it and actually pay attention to it and care about it when it came out to some degree. I mean, like the fact that there are 5 new movies, or really 4 new movies, because maybe we shouldn't count Singin' in the Rain since it's been in the top 10 before, but there were 4 new movies in the top 10 of the critics list this time, and that's like, that was shocking. It really was, I thought. And the fact that 2 of them were by women, directed by women, that's I mean, unfortunately shocking, but great too. Mia?
Yeah. I had a question too, because throughout our conversation, we've been referring more to the critics list. Is that the one that's considered, like if you're talking about the Sight and Sound poll, is it the critics list that's kind of the default one, or is that considered the more accurate or prestigious one, or why that one?
Yeah, to my mind, I think that yes, it is considered the default one for a couple of reasons. One, it's the one that's been going since 1952. They only started doing the director's list, I think, in 92 or 2002. We have it on our spreadsheet that we use, but I don't have it in front of me at the moment. So there's that, and then also the pool of directors that they survey for the director's list is smaller.
Okay.
I don't have that number in front of me at the moment, but it's not 1,600 directors. It's like, I want to say it's somewhere in the 400 to 700 range or something. I don't know, but I do think they increased that. But like, I don't think it was probably nearly as dramatic. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Actually, why don't we take a quick break? We'll be right back. And we're back. So getting back to these stats, some other things that might be interesting to get into. There were a lot of movies that had been in the top 100 before, like in 2012, but moved up quite a bit. So these are the ones that moved within the top 100 by the most. Beau Travail moved up 71 spots. Ali, Fear Eats the Soul, moved up 43. The Night of the Hunter moved up 38. I wish that one was in the top 10. Jeanne Dielman, as we said before, moved up 34 spots. Tuki Buki moved up 27. Close Up moved up 25. Casablanca moved up 21. Mulholland Drive moved up 20. M moved up 20. In the Mood for Love and Playtime moved up 19. And Imitation of Life moved up 18. So that's not necessarily all the movies that moved up, but those are the top movers there. Any comments on those?
I want to watch a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Casablanca I'd want to watch again. I only saw that for the first time maybe like 5 years ago.
It's a great movie.
It was amazing.
It's the best movie.
Big screen.
Would that be at the top of your list, Mia?
It would be really high. I mean, that was one of the things when you first told me about this poll, and I was like, wait, what do you mean Casablanca is like relegated? I can't believe it. I mean, it's just because it's like AFI's #1 movie, or it has been and stuff. So
yeah, or up there, yeah.
And I think it's just regarded as like one of the best love stories, one of the best films.
Yeah.
Like when you think of classic cinema, you think of Casablanca. I love it. I've seen it at BAM on the big screen and a couple other places on the big screen, and in the comfort of my home too. And it's just a wonderful film. So just my only other comment is I don't know a lot of these other ones.
Yeah.
So
I can't remember if I've seen M or not. I feel like M is a movie I would have watched, but I can't remember if I have or not.
Yeah, some of these I've seen, but I have no recollection of what they were
it's been
about.
a while. Yeah. I remember that I saw M sitting in a little booth with a little TV in the library at NYU, and it was a like terrible translation because it's like one of those times when it's in German and people would talk for a good while and then the translation would be like 2 words. I was like, I'm missing something here. Like this is no good. So I always kind of felt like I needed to revisit it and just never have because I don't think that was the best experience of watching it. So highest drop-offs from the top 100. So these are movies that were previously in the top 100 in 2012 and no longer are. So Godfather Part 2 was at number 31 in 2012, no longer in the top 100. I think this has maybe gotten the most conversation or some of the most conversation, and let's come back to that one. Let me get through the list, and then we'll come back to that. So Gertrude was at number 42 in 2012, no longer on the list. Raging Bull was at 53, Touch of Evil 57, Le Moment et la Putain was at 59, Wild Strawberries was at 63, so was Pickpocket, and so was Rio Bravo. Les Clis was at 73, Les Enfants de Paradis was at 73, and so was Le Grand Illusion and Nashville. So the last 4 were all tied at 73 in 2012, and none of them are in the top 100. None of those were in the top 100. So yeah, Raging Bull has gotten a lot of discussion. Theories I have seen are that, so we've kind of talked about this, I think, in the past, like when we first started doing the podcast, but one year at least, they allowed The Godfather and The Godfather 2 to count as one movie for people to vote on, and it ranked pretty high that time. Then they split it up after that. They said you can't do that anymore, and they both fell. But I think Godfather 2 fell further. And I think I kind of get it. And I don't know if you guys will agree with me about this, but like, I understand deciding if I'm going to vote for one of these movies and maybe I should only vote for one of them, I'm going to vote for The Godfather, even though I personally, I think as we discussed when we did the episode on Godfather 2, like, I think it's the better movie probably, but it doesn't stand on its own to me. Like, I can't watch The Godfather Part 2 and get the same power from it if I haven't seen The Godfather. That's my opinion. So I have a feeling that's why it's not there. What do you guys think? Any thoughts?
I also think the first one has a tighter story. The second one is great. It's really sprawling. And I love it. But I just, in terms of like story structure, I think the first one is a little more cohesive, and so I think maybe that's why it edged it out. But yeah, maybe also people were just trying to not split the vote, so I don't know.
Yeah, I actually do enjoy the first one better or more than the second one, just as a movie goes. But I feel like they should have put both of them on the list. Like, they shouldn't have actually, either both of them should have been there or none of them should have been there, just because they're both such great movies and they complement each other so well. I feel like it would have been hard for me to make a decision based on that, so I would have probably had both.
Okay. And one that I want to also point out is Nashville dropping off, I think, is a shame, because there is no Altman film on there. And, he was an innovative filmmaker. I've seen people speculate about some of these movies feature very explicit misogyny and maybe violence towards women. And so maybe people didn't want to honor them in the same way that they've been honored in the past. Whether the films actually are glamorizing that or just portraying it is another question. But I have seen people suggest that, and there might be something to that. Like, that's if a critic doesn't like a movie, or whoever is voting, critic or director, doesn't like a movie, they don't like a movie. If they don't like it because it shows something they don't want to see, that's for them to say.
Well, with Touch of Evil, definitely. I mean, it's hard to get past the brown face now. I haven't watched it since I was in college, but I would imagine what I would think today if I was watching it. Could I even get past it enough to see it as a good or a bad movie?
Right.
I was surprised about Raging Bull coming off and Taxi Driver staying on, but I know we all have our opinions on which one of those is better. I completely hate Taxi Driver, so that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I'm the other way, as you're alluding to. I think I think Taxi Driver is a much better film. And if we're talking about like Scorsese films, particularly, I think it's the better one to honor of his. If you're trying to get one of his up there, that's my opinion. Now moving to films that stayed in the top 100 from 2012 to 2002, but dropped significantly. These are the top drops in the top 100. And again, these are all talking about the critics list at this point. So The General, which we have reviewed on the show, dropped 61. La Ventura, which we also covered, dropped 51. Battleship Potemkin dropped 43. Pierrot Le Fou, which we covered, dropped 42. Santantango dropped 41. So did Andrei Rublev. Ugetsu dropped 40. Histoires du Cinéma dropped 36. Le Mépris 33. Also The Leopard 33. Metropolis and A Man Escaped both dropped 32. Journey to Italy dropped 31. And Breathless dropped 25. So any thoughts on those, since we have watched a couple of those and they're still on the top 100, but not as high as they once were? You can say it.
I literally don't see how Pierre Le Fou is still on this list. It's so bad.
We hated it.
We hated it. Like, how is
for our
that?
listeners, we actually have already recorded that episode, but it hasn't come out yet. But none of us enjoyed the movie, really, just to give a spoiler.
Oh my God. Like,
it was
how
pretty. It was
Yeah.
pretty.
Sure.
It really
Yeah,
was.
I'll give it that. Sure.
But not pretty
on.
enough to make you want to watch it. Like, there's other, I don't want people to think, oh, it's pretty, I'll watch it with the sound off or something, you know? It's
Yeah.
still, there's better movies for that even.
Mhm.
I just can't believe that The Godfather 2 is the sequel. The requel is ranked higher than, or ranked lower than this movie.
Well, I guess pertaining to this list and maybe the other drop list, I'd have to look back at it. I saw someone I saw some speculation about because there were Battleship Potemkin, Andrei Rublev. Was there something else that was from Russia or the USSR? Like, someone was saying basically, like, if you flipped when the Ukraine war started and when Godard died, we might have a different list here, because like people might have not wanted to honor Russian films, which may be silly to think of it that way. And the ballots had already gone out when Godard passed away, unfortunately, very recently. So that might not have, like, if people were voting after he had died, which they may not have been, maybe Breathless would have not dropped 25. Maybe it would be in the top 10. Who knows? So I don't know. Like, I'm just saying that this is speculation I've seen, because there's a lot of conversation going online, a lot of chatter. So just reporting what I've read. Take it with a grain of salt, for sure. But any thoughts on that, anybody?
Not on that, but on some other stuff on this particular
Go for it.
list. Yeah, I was sad to see La Ventura drop that far, because I really did come to like that movie when we watched it, and I was happy to see like a little homage in this current season of The White Lotus. That was really fun. And I was surprised, but maybe in a good way, that The General dropped as far as it did. And yeah, the rest of them I don't think I've seen. So those are my takeaways from that.
Yeah, and another bit of speculation that I've read is actually relates to like our conversation about The General when we talked about it, that maybe people didn't want to recognize a film where the hero is in the Confederacy as much anymore. Yeah. So maybe that's why it dropped so much, and why Sherlock Jr., Keaton's other film, was up higher this time. Okay, so we could talk about like the spread of movies from regions of the world or countries. I mean, there's some movement there. I guess it's safe to say. Like, there were a fewer films from Western Europe, even though there was the same number from the USA, and just one less from France. Still a very Franco-friendly list. Still a very US-friendly list. And then Eastern Europe stayed the same. Asia, 4 more films from Asia than last time. Still just 2 African films. This time there was an Australian film, and still no Latin American films, which is pretty crazy, I think.
Yeah,
That's a
that's
pretty
not-
significant chunk of the world that's just not represented by this list at all.
It's ridiculous.
It's pretty sad. Those are some of the stats that were compiled by, again, Kevin B. Lee. So appreciate that he put that together and that we could pull from that and have a discussion. But why don't we kind of circle back to the big news, the top film, the greatest film of all time, according to the new list, Jeanne Dielman. So Mia, you and I watched it. What were your thoughts on it? Just let's describe it for people who may not be familiar with it, which is probably a lot of people like us.
Sure. So the film follows a woman who is a widow, and it's her going through her daily domestic routines, taking care of the house, taking care of her son. She's also a prostitute, so men come over in the afternoons, and it's slow cinema, so it's following, like, she needs meatloaf, she washes the dishes, she cooks food, she sets the table, and it's all basically in real time. There aren't really none of the stuff that's typically cut out of films is cut out. It's the point of this film. There's very little dialogue, there's no soundtrack. It's very sparse, and like I said earlier, I'd never heard of it before, but it's considered a feminist film. She's considered a feminist director. And my understanding of that is because it's, shining this light on domestic work, a woman as the, centerpiece of the film. And it is her in relation to men. Like, there's her and her son's relationship. They don't really go into they touch on her and her husband's relationship, but her and her deceased husband, but it's not like a major focal point of the film, in my opinion. And then
But the film does kind of define her as a widow, so that is like,
yeah, but there's like one scene when they go into it, maybe two, but he's not like constantly brought up or anything like that. And then it's her, I don't even want to say relationships, but her like interactions with the 3 or 4 men who stop by over the course of the 3 days. But anyways, it's like very much centering her and her experiences, and like I said, shining this light on domestic work, housekeeping, running errands, shopping, cleaning, cooking, those kind of things that are usually not seen in films and not prioritized. I'm like struggling because I don't want to say too much because I know we're going to do an episode about this at some point. So like, obviously don't want to give away any major plot points, but also like, I don't know. So anyways, let me just stop there. And then if we keep talking, I can share more about it. But yeah.
I want to add in that, like you mentioned, it happens in real time, and I've seen it described that way elsewhere. So I do want to clarify, because I think that can be confusing. It's not like the movie is basically 3 hours and 20 minutes long, right? It's not examining a 3 hour and 20 minute chunk of this woman's life. It's divided into 3 parts, which are 3 days of her life. And it's that each shot happens in real time, which I mean, doesn't every shot, but there's not cutting within a scene. Basically, anytime that there is a cut to a new shot, it's either because we're going to a different location or we're skipping ahead in time a little bit to move things along to the next task that she is going to complete or go through the ritual and routine of her day. So it's again, it's not that the movie happens in absolute real time. It's just that like we watch things happen, like a shot plays out, like you watch her do a thing and you don't cut into it to see her hands more closely and cut back out to see her reaction on her face. It's all in like a wide or a medium shot until you cut to the next thing that's going to happen or the next place something is going to happen. And so I just wanted to clarify that. But it's a very purposeful type of filmmaking, I think is safe to say. And it's not probably for everyone. I do think that there's I think it's maybe personally for me, I would describe this film, and it might sound cliche, as a film that I appreciate rather than I necessarily enjoy, but I do appreciate it. Like I see what it's trying to do. I understand it at some point, and I think that it is a strong film. Like I think it has a message, and if you're willing to go with it and like experience it, there is something there to be had. So like I think that a lot of the discussion in this film could be scary to people who like don't usually watch this kind of movie. So I don't know. I just wanted to kind of demystify it or sort of like whatever. But like I'm sure a lot of people probably saw this film listed there and like us were like, what is this exactly? And we'll put it on and are going to turn it off and not get through the 3 hours. I mean, a lot of people don't get through any 3 hour movie, but like it's a tough watch. I think it's safe to say. I would call it a tough watch. And I think it's a tough watch for a lot of casual movie watchers. So I don't know.
Do you think if it was a shorter movie, it would have been better? Like maybe if it was, maybe an
That's
hour
the thing.
fewer?
No, I don't think so. Because I think the length of the film plays a role in the message of the film.
Yeah.
You
The
know?
length is the point almost.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know?
okay.
Yeah. You'll see when you watch it. No, I mean, just, I feel like it's hard to describe it in
It
a
is hard to
way
describe.
that doesn't make it sound dumb or I don't know, like, yeah, something that you'd say, well, if it was this, could it be better? Or if it was this, like, yeah, I mean, if it had more dialogue, if it had a soundtrack, if it was like an hour and a half shorter, like, but then it would just be a completely different movie, right? Like, so.
Well,
Yeah.
there's some movies that, you can take 20 minutes out of it and you're like, oh, the pacing
Yeah.
would have been better and it would have been a better
Right.
movie or it dragged out too much or whatever. That's why I was asking. I was just
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a fair question. And
Yeah.
I think that with a lot of movies, that would be the case. And I think this is one where it's like odd that, yeah, like it feels like a movie as you're watching it sometimes that you're like, oh my God, this is going on forever. But then when you get to the end of it, you're like, I guess it needed to.
Yeah.
It's just a different type of movie, and definitely a different type of movie that's ever been at the top of this list, since it's only the fourth movie to ever be at the top of this list.
I haven't seen it obviously, but I think it sounds really interesting, and I think maybe like as a woman, I could identify with like the sort of stultifying and like oppressive, like long shots, because that's sort of how like not our generation really, or even like our mother's generation, but like so much, but like women for hundreds and thousands of years before that have had these like have been forced to have that type of life, and they haven't had a lot of opportunities to be educated or have careers and things like that, things that would make like more interesting movie. But also I think it's interesting that it sounds like this movie is more like pushing the envelope on the form, like filmmaking as a type of filmmaking, as opposed to like being like an entertaining movie or having like a really strong story or something. I mean, I don't know, I haven't seen it, but like, so I think that's kind of interesting that they did that, because Vertigo and Citizen Kane have such strong stories, even though they are also like doing interesting things with filmmaking. They also are like really tight and interesting stories.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to say less eloquently, but basically a similar point, that to me it's so significant that it's not just that there is a movie about a woman or a movie by a woman, but this like hard to watch, kind of like palatable movie about not a very likable woman. Like that's the top movie. Like to me, that's like such a big statement there, like women don't have to be likable. They don't have to be what you want them to be. It doesn't have to be a movie that's about a woman in this like really neat package with a plot and a climax. I mean, there is a climax to the movie, but it's not a normal quote unquote movie. So, and I was going to make a very similar point, Alicia, like compared to Citizen Kane, which is like this larger than life story. Like this is the tiniest of stories here. So anyways, I just thought that was really significant.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it sounds like we're probably going to get to this movie pretty quick in our lineup of movies we watch for this show, right? So I don't want to belabor the point too much, but like just to say another thing about it related to what Mia was saying and what Alicia was saying, I think we watched an interview with Chantal Akerman after watching the movie where she kind of talks about like her purpose in making the movie and what it means to her and what she hoped it would mean to people. And part of what she said that I thought was interesting was that, you know, like movies, in a lot of movies, it's like a chase or a fire or some action scene. Those are given importance because it's like big things happening. And she wanted to show small things and give them the same importance and the same placement on the screen. And that gives them that importance, if that makes sense. She wanted to elevate these things to the same level as like the boxing scene of Raging Bull or the bombast of Citizen Kane and Rosebud or something, you know, the craziness of Vertigo. But it's just small moments. So like, and she just described that also as a lot of those things that she was countering tend to be male centric or, you know, like you think of them as like, those are things from guy movies, you know? And so this was her saying like, I want to elevate like what is female in the world that I see around me and the women I know or grew up around. I want to see that on the screen and make it important in the same way. So just a little preview of the movie, I guess. But yeah.
We obviously watched this movie. It's on HBO. It's on Criterion. We watched it just sitting on the couch. And I can only imagine what this experience would be like in a movie theater because like we were saying, there's just these, you know, long shots of things and you can kind of zone out and zone back in and zone out while something's going on. And of course, it's easy, you know, after like an hour or whatever, oh, let's stop, let's get a snack or, oh, let's, you know, you pick up your phone for something or whatever. It's easy to kind of pull yourself out of it. But I can't imagine being in a movie theater where you can't do that and where you're also around all these other people. It reminds me of this experiment it was like a performance thing that happened years ago where someone would just sit silently on the stage and then watch everyone get progressively more and more uncomfortable. So Alicia and Steven, since you live in a place that's real and maybe this will come out in a movie theater or something, if you have the chance to go see it, you should, because I would be so interested to do that or to, you know, hear your experiences with that.
Yeah, and to your point, like I was reading a bunch of pieces about this film after the list came out and people were starting to write about it, and one of them was by I believe Alyssa Wilkinson at Vox. She's one of the film critics at Vox, and she talked about how she didn't really know much about this movie at some point, and she saw that it was playing on a screen in New York somewhere. I think she was in New York, and she was like, okay, I'm going to go to see this. And she went, and she didn't realize until she was walking into the movie theater that it's a 3-hour plus movie. So she like texted her husband that like, I'm going to be late for dinner. And she just like kind of settled into it and was like, oh my God. And she talked about it. Like, I'm not sure these were the words she used, but the way she described it made it sound like for her, it was like almost like this hypnotic, trance-inducing experience or something. Those are my words, not her words. And so I don't know. I just wanted to bring that up since Mia, you brought that up about like not being able to see it in that way, so that someone has talked about that. If you're interested in reading that piece,
that was kind of how I felt when I watched Mirror Tarkovsky. I was like,
I was going to bring that up too.
Yeah.
That's why I was interested in seeing this too. Yeah, just because, you know, it's really just doing this podcast has made me think of movies in a different way. Like you don't necessarily have to have a plot for a movie to be interesting, or, you know, you can't compartmentalize everything when you watch something and expecting to have some sort of payoff in a way that you expect it because you've been watching movies a certain way, you know, so
right.
I'm okay with just having it wash over me, I think.
So let's go ahead and take another quick break. We will be right back. And we're back. Maybe we should mention that Paul Schrader, who's kind of a bomb thrower, but also like a very gifted filmmaker, his own self, like he is, for people who might not know, He wrote Taxi Driver, which we mentioned earlier. He was one of the writers on Raging Bull. He's worked with Martin Scorsese a whole lot. He has directed a whole lot of films himself. American Gigolo, First Reformed, The Card Counter. He has a movie coming out called like Master Gardener. Like, he's a relevant filmmaker, for sure. I feel stupid even saying that. But anyway, he has a very active, sometimes, Facebook page where he will say stuff and people will get mad about it because he says stuff that he, it rubs people the wrong way sometimes. So this is what he said. He said, for 70 years, the Sight and Sound poll has been a reliable, if somewhat incremental measure of critical consensus and priorities. Films moved up the list, others moved down. But it took time. The sudden appearance of Jeanne Dielman in the number 1 slot undermines the Sight and Sound poll's credibility. It feels off, as if someone had put their thumb on the scale, which I suspect they did. As Tom Stoppard pointed out in Jumpers, in democracy, it doesn't matter who gets the votes, it matters who counts the votes. By expanding the voting community and the point system, this year's Sight and Sound poll reflects not a historical continuum, but a politically correct rejiggering. Ackerman's film is a favorite of mine, a great film, a landmark film, but its unexpected number 1 rating does it no favors. Jeanne Dielman will from this time forward be remembered not only as an important film in cinema history, but also as a landmark of distorted woke reappraisal. So I do want to just right off of there say that I don't think that Paul Schrader does himself any favors by using terms like woke reappraisal or politically correct rejiggering. Like, I think if you took those away, he has like a somewhat valid point that you can engage with, disagree with, agree with, whatever you want. Like, I think it just depends on like what you think this list is and should be. Like, should this list that comes out every 10 years be an agreed upon canon of the greatest films of all time, or should it be sort of like a snapshot of, for lack of a better word, the zeitgeist of the moment and what is viewed as important, the values that are important at the time the poll comes out, or some combination of the two? Is it on a spectrum between those 2 points? And like I said, I think that other than him being so angry about it, he doesn't necessarily have an invalid point here. Not that he needs me to say that to him, but yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think?
If you were ranking your top 10, would that be number 1? Would it even be in your top 10 at all? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because I haven't seen it. Steven hasn't seen it, so I don't think I could really have an opinion. But
Mia, do you want to go first?
I honestly feel like I'm still, and this is like a total cop out, but like I feel like I'm still kind of like sitting with it. Like, if someone was like, make a list of like your 10 favorite films, it would not be in my list of 10 favorite films. But I think it's important. And I was just, because I literally just, as you were reading this, I was like, wait, what is he talking about? This new point system. So I was trying to just Google that really quickly and find out anything about it. And I couldn't in 30 seconds. But what I did see was this, there's a lot of people talking about this quote online. And just one thing I saw quickly said that Jeanne Dielman was the highest ranked movie by a female director in the 2012 poll, which makes sense. And so I wonder how many people, again, being deliberate, were like, I want to put a film by a female filmmaker in my top 10. This is the one that not even saying it was like some like organized thing, but like, this is the one that you would clearly choose because it's like has the most chance of like rising, not necessarily to the number 1 spot or even the top 10, but just rising in the poll. To me, so I disagree with the idea that like, okay, now the 2022 list is like the film canon and like forget all these other lists. To me, it's like there's changing mores, there's changing preferences. Like, you know, hopefully, in my opinion, at least, these things are pushing in like a more progressive way over time and becoming more inclusive and broader about like who makes films and what stories are told. I understand that not everyone thinks like that, including Paul Schrader, potentially. This is a long non-answer to your question, but I'm okay with there being different polls and them each having their own value in them. That's cool.
You mean from year to 10 years later, or from directors to credit? What are the different polls in your scenario?
Over the years. Like, to me,
Okay,
it's not like, oh, now we have this poll and that's the greatest films of all time forever. And like, let's just like rip up these polls that came in 2012 or
Right.
2002 or 1992. To me, it's like, it's like a snapshot in time of what people were
Right.
thinking about then. And hopefully over time, we have more women, we have more people of color, we have more diversity in both filmmakers and stories being told. And so fine, that's a snapshot of where we are as a society right now, that like for a bunch of people, it was important that there be a female directed film in their top 10, obviously. I'm okay with that personally.
Yeah, and I also think that like it might not be as now that I know, because I didn't know that, so I'm glad that you pointed it out that that Jeanne Dielman was the highest ranked female directed film last time. And what do we say, it was at 35 last time? Now obviously at 1. Like it might just be as simple as, since it was the highest rated, more people watched it and agreed that it should be recognized, and so that it just naturally ascended. Like, because it might not be that there was like some concerted effort and like chattering between people that like we need to get a female directed film at the top of the list. It might have just been that there was more interest in that film since it was the top one. So like I didn't know that before you said that.
Yeah,
so
and I think it can be both, right? Like I think these people are, colleagues and all of that. Like it's not like they're not talking about this.
True.
Like
they're critics. Their whole job is basically having conversations about film. So like it's not like this didn't come up with people. That doesn't mean, but it still doesn't mean it was like a concerted effort of like,
sure,
you're in on this conspiracy to like anoint this film. It could still just be like a completely natural outcome of circumstances.
Yeah.
But to answer the question myself, I wouldn't put it at the top personally, but I also just watched it 5 days ago or something, like I don't think I would ever put a movie I saw so recently at the top of a list, but like I can understand why it's at the top of some people's list. I'm not sure if it'll ever be at the top of mine. Like I have films that I really love that I would put at the top. Like 2001 is my favorite film of all time. It's also the top film on the director's list, and I'm really happy to see that. I thought it might end up at the top spot here. It was one of the few films that I thought had a shot at that. I never in a million years saw Jeanne Dielman coming for that. But who cares? Like, I mean, I do think that there is something reactionary about this list this time, and that's fine. Like, reactionary isn't always bad, I think. Like, I think more people are watching Jeanne Dielman and other films on this list that, like, we're kind of using Jeanne Dielman as a placeholder maybe for other films, too, that, like, are getting more attention now because they made it as high as they did and onto the list at all, and that's great. Like, I think that that's a great thing that people are finding new films. Like, that's part of why I originally cared about this list 20 years ago. It's like, I've seen this film, I've seen that film, I love those, and they're saying that these films are as good as that, so I want to watch these, like that's what these lists are for to me. But yeah, for some people it's supposed to be a canon, and it didn't work out for them, I guess. What are you going to do?
I don't worry too much personally about like what's number 1 and what's number 5, anything like that. I kind of prefer to look at the list overall. I mean, obviously, like we've been paying special attention to movies that were in the top 10, but like, I just think it's exciting to see things represented on there that I haven't seen in the past. And I know I'm not a younger person, but especially if you want to continue making things that young people are interested in, or you want to keep young people engaged with your poll and your list, then yeah, you need to open it up a little bit to like newer filmmakers, right, and women and people of different backgrounds. And I just think it's like a necessary thing that has to happen. I don't know if somebody put their thumb on the scale, as Schrader says, but like, I mean, it may be, like maybe it wasn't like, let's all get together and make this the number 1, but just like opening it up to more people will naturally, hopefully, continue to make that happen, and made it happen this time.
Well, you touched on another part of Schrader's message that I just don't see the point of. Because, like, yeah, I do think someone put their thumb on the scale. They just didn't do it in the way that he's
Right.
claiming. Because
Yep.
they invited new people to be a part of this process. So that was the way they put the thumb on the scale. They were like, we think that this could be better. So let's invite these people. And now we have this list. So yeah, thumb on scale. It was before the voting started, though. Is if you want to get into his like who counts the votes and who or whatever, like it's just who voted was more important this time, which we've talked on this podcast previously about. Like we hoped that would be the case. So this is what happens when you do that. So not that everybody has to agree with us who listens to this podcast, or we don't all have to agree amongst ourselves about that, But
yeah, we might end up, Stephen and I might end up hating this movie.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
for
you
now,
might.
I can't say.
I think it's an easily hateable movie. Like honestly, like I'm not saying that as like a derogatory thing. It's a difficult movie, but
we've seen
it's
some
also
different
like, yeah. It's important though. It's an important film. Like it's been influential in a way that I didn't realize before and understand better after having seen it. So
It was funny that Alicia said she doesn't pay attention to lists, but I really do pay attention to lists. So if I see a top 10 list, I'll immediately see what's the number one movie and see if maybe that's something that I agree with or disagree with. And if I didn't see it, then I'm much more prone to look for it. So I feel like with that list, it does kind of lend itself to having a number one that a lot of people, like even casual moviegoers or even critics, have not even heard of. And they would seek it out to try to watch it. And it does make more people actually look at the list since there is so many different movies. And it's kind of made a splash, I think, because I mean, I've heard of Sight and Sound, but it is a magazine that, I feel like magazines in general are not really followed that much anymore. So I feel like they do lend themselves to having something that's not really well known, to have it be number one.
Mm-hmm. And just as a way of showing the interest in this movie because of this list, like I saw something from Letterboxd tweeted something that, for people who don't know, Letterboxd is a website. It's basically a social media website for movie lovers where you can go on there, rate movies that you've seen, review them, interact with other people doing the same thing. And they said that like one of the things you can do on the website is like mark films that you want to watch. And so you add it to your watch list. And the percentage by which that increased for Jeanne Dielman after this list came out, between the time it came out and whenever they tweeted this, was 3,400%.
Wow.
Like from whatever period before that. I don't know if they were talking about like within a week versus a week, or like a couple of days versus a couple of days or whatever. But it was like an exponential, increase. So like this generated interest, like we were talking about previously, or at least I was, in the film. And they were just using that because it's the top of the heap. Like I'm sure if they drilled down into how many people are interested in Beau Travail now, like something similar, like even Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which a lot of people are probably still fresh in their mind, but like a lot of people probably still don't know about that movie either because it's like an art house international film, But
yeah, I mean, well, like as I said, I don't always pay attention to like the actual rankings on a list, but like this coming in at number one definitely like made me pay attention to it and made me really curious, and also made me excited. Like even if I do end up thinking it sucks or something, like it was still exciting for me when I saw it as like something I never heard of by a woman about a woman. I found that really exciting, and it made me more interested in looking at everything on the list than I ever have been in the past. So I think that's always going to be a good thing if you can bring more people in.
So I know we've been going long at this point, but there are a few other things I would love to get to if that's okay. And we could go through these kind of quickly if you want. So I did want to address the fact that there is no Spielberg film on the critics list, but he was on the directors list. I wanted to bring this up for our friend Charlie from our Facebook group, because he pointed this out to us in the comments on in our Facebook group when we're posting about the new list. And like this is another thing where I saw speculation about it, of vote splitting, basically. Like think about how many films people consider their favorite by Spielberg. Like a lot of people think Close Encounters is his best film. A lot of people think E.T. A lot of people think Raiders of the Lost Ark. So like it's probably just that not enough people just pick the same movie. He has a lot of good movies, or a lot of beloved movies, so that's probably accounts for that. I buy that argument.
Let's get rid of Pierrot Le Fou and put any Spielberg movie on there, honestly. And I mean, to me, like Schindler's List, I mean, I don't know the critical take on Schindler's List, but like, I feel like that was a really important film that just gets like no attention, and people don't even hardly talk about it at all anymore. So
didn't it win Best Picture?
Mm-hmm.
I think so.
It won Best Picture. He won Best Director for the first time. Yeah. But yeah, I do feel like that movie doesn't have like the critical long tail that you would maybe think it would. Like it gets kind of viewed by some people as like, oh, it was his Oscar movie, and then he got back to his normal thing. So then there's interesting takes like Jay Hoberman saying that of the two films that Spielberg made in 1993, Jurassic Park was the real Holocaust movie.
Wow, I don't know how to process that.
So another thing I want to bring up for Alicia is that this is the first time in this poll's history that Rules of the Game hasn't been in the top 10. So if people want to go back and listen to our Rules of the Game episode, Alicia, not a big fan of that movie.
No, I had a very strong negative reaction to that movie. So yeah, I'm totally fine with it not being on the top 10. That's another one I feel like you could replace any Spielberg movie with that movie, and I would be totally fine with it. Didn't like
Mia,
it.
I don't know if I'd say any Spielberg
no,
movie.
I'm saying any.
Yeah, I know you are, but I do understand it though. Like we talked about on that episode that like I think there's a lot about that movie that's so specific to the time and place it was made that it can be hard to kind of relate to it without going deep on like reading up on what the movie is about and why this is in there and why this person acts like this and stuff like that. It's harder to engage with. However many decades later
I'm being
since it came out.
Facetious when I say all that. I mean, honestly, like I understand why it's there, and there are things that I can appreciate about it. Just like for me personally, I just didn't like it. But so I'm happy it's not in the top 10, but I'm sure like it deserves to be on the list or whatever.
One other thing I did want to bring up is just the movies that came out since the last poll that did make it onto this poll. Get Out came in tied at 95. Parasite was tied at 90. Moonlight tied at 60. And I think we've already said that Portrait of a Lady on Fire came in at 30, which is a huge debut on this list. Y'all asked Mia and I if Jeanne Dielman would have been at the top of our list. But let's just open it up a little bit. Like, is there any movie that anyone here, or movies, like, have you thought about like what would have been in your top 10 list that you would have submitted if you were a voter in this? Has anybody, like, you don't have to go through a whole 10, but like, is there a movie would be on it?
I always, I'm always the person who wants Pulp Fiction on the list. I mean, I know Quentin Tarantino, people kind of consider him a hack, but I just think in terms of like just filmmaking and storytelling, I really just love that movie through and through. So that would have been my top pick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love Pulp Fiction. I would be happy to see that on there too. Yeah, Tarantino's a little controversial, but I still think his films are like just so much fun, and especially Pulp Fiction is like for me his most fun movie. But I think I already said like Moonlight was on my list, and I was really like trying to think of what else I would pick, because I was like, well, maybe I wouldn't pick Moonlight. I was just kind of trying to think about other stuff, because we were talking about what movies we would add and watch before the new list came out that we didn't get around to doing. But
right,
Moonlight was the one that I just kept coming back to, and I found it just like so moving. I think it's really cool that like Get Out and Do the Right Thing are on there too. Do the Right Thing like should have been on before already, but Moonlight I found this like so out of those three movies, that's the one that I found like the most personally like moving and transcendent or whatever. So I was just really happy to see that one on there.
Mia, any movies?
Mm-hmm. Now you're making me want to rewatch Moonlight because it's so good. I really love Parasite, and I'm glad it's on the list. I personally would have put it like significantly higher if I was making a list. I'm okay that it's lower because I understand, like, you know, it's new, and I'm okay with it taking time to rise, but I hope in 2032 that it's higher. I also, out of relatively recent movies, I really love Lady Bird, and I would love to see that on the list too.
Okay. Well, I did come up with a full bootleg ballot
Overachiever.
of 10 movies.
Of course you did.
Overachiever.
Yeah. Well, I think about movies too much. I'm sorry. So I'll just read it off. At number 10, I put Hiroshima Mon Amour. At number 9, I put Camera Person, which I don't know if has ever gotten mentioned on this podcast before. It's a documentary that came out, I don't know how many years ago now, sometime in the last 5 to 10 years, I believe. And it's directed by a woman, which is also nice that I have it in here for that. I like it a lot. And I feel a little self-conscious about this one, but at number 8, I have There Will Be Blood, which I think gets considered to be just like a film bro movie by a lot of serious film people. But it's a movie that just like I go back to a lot and always find to be very rich. Number 7, I have Bicycle Thieves. 6, Do the Right Thing. 5, The Night of the Hunter. And 4, Passion of Joan of Arc. 3, Paether Panchali. 2, The Godfather. And 2001, A Space Odyssey at number 1. And I will say that I basically, like what we talked about with The Godfather before, I decided I'm just going to have the one film. I thought about putting 2 right behind 1 on this list, but I just decided go with the film that stands on its own. And Paether Panchali, I will say, like, I was surprised that this wasn't higher this time, because I think we've talked in this episode and maybe others about how, like, sometimes when a movie has a re-release, that seems to help it on this poll, the poll that comes out after that big release. And Paether Panchali had a big release a few years ago, and so I just thought it'd be higher. Thought it might even end up in the number 1 spot because of that, but it did not. And then I will point out that Do the Right Thing and Night of the Hunter, which I have at 5 and 6, kind of share a thing, because in Night of the Hunter, Robert Mitchum has love and hate tattooed on his knuckles, and then Spike Lee takes that and Do the Right Thing and makes them into brass knuckles in that movie, which I think is, I didn't mean to put them next to each other, but then looking at it, realized that and thought that was kind of interesting. But anyway, so that's my list. If I'd ever been invited to participate, which why would I? But
I like that you had Hiroshima Mon Amour on there, because that was one of my favorites that we've watched so far too, and it hasn't been on the list at all for a long time. That would definitely be on my list too.
It was between that and Tokyo Story for me, and I just decided at the last minute sort of that, like, I think I need more time with Tokyo Story. I liked it a lot, but it's been a little bit since we watched it, so it's kind of faded a little bit, but I remember liking it, and I think I like it more now even than I did right after watching it, and I want to go back to it. I bet if I'd watched it again, it would be in here, but maybe Hiroshima Mon Amour is a little fresher for me, or just like the things that stood out to me were enough that I was like, I want to put this in there. Like, I think it represents something that I would like to see on my list. But I really like both of those movies a lot. Tokyo Story 2 is like a movie that I thought might be number 1 on the critics list, and it wasn't, obviously. But so it was like I thought it would be either Paether Panchali, Tokyo Story, or 2001, and not so much.
I liked Tokyo Story a lot too.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one more thing, because I meant to bring this up earlier, and then you reminded me when you said the re-release. And one thing that I also wonder if it played into the greater diversity of the films on this list. One, I think that Jeanne Dielman, I read somewhere the other day, it did have a re-release, or maybe just even a more broad release,
right?
Recently, so that probably helped it. But also, too, from 2012 to now, think how much streaming has grown. Like, was there even like the Criterion channel that you could watch in 2012? I don't know. Also, people have spent a lot of time at home the last 3 years watching movies. So I wonder too if it's just like,
that's
you
true.
know, movies that, you know, maybe you always knew, oh, this is the movie like I should watch. Or, and I mean, again, I assume the people who are voting on these polls have probably seen all these movies already because they do movies. But, you know, there's got to be something to there being greater accessibility to these films where you can just watch it, even if you don't live in New York or LA or somewhere, and you can like go deep on, you know, watch every single Godard film on the Criterion channel or, you know, whatever, in a way that wasn't as accessible before. So anyways, I think the impact of streaming and the pandemic on this, in addition to the other social changes and stuff that we talked about earlier, like probably cannot be underestimated.
Mm-hmm. I think another thing to maybe think about is that my sense of it is that who critics are generally, movie critics, I'm talking specifically about who they are generally anymore, is less distant from us as moviegoers and fans than they used to be. Like it used to be that like you would read like the critic from the New Yorker or the New York Times or whoever, and it was like this person way off somewhere that watched these movies and like spoke from on high in a way. And like maybe they had a dumbass opinion, but like they were the one whose opinion counted for whatever reason, you know? And now like there are more outlets, more types of outlets that employ more critics from different backgrounds, and you can interact with them. Like there's film Twitter now. Like film Twitter probably plays a big part in this. Letterboxd plays a big part in this. Like a lot of critics are accessible and in conversation with people who aren't critics in a way that they weren't before, to that degree, at least, I think. So like, I have no way of quantifying that exactly, but it's a sense I have of like being sort of in that world of like loving movies and seeking out critics and finding them accessible in a way that they weren't. You could like tweet at them. You could like their Letterboxd review and just see their like stupid review on Letterboxd that is just sort of off the cuff, like first thoughts, and then read their like polished review later. You know, like it's a different world than it was when this poll started 8 decades ago or 7 decades ago or whatever it was. So I don't know. I think that kind of goes hand in hand with what you're talking about, Mia, of like, you know, technology has changed and the people and have changed too along with that, you know, like it's a different thing.
Yeah, Paul Schrader. Take your woke reappraisal and go home.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's so sad to me when people who can be so like smart, because Paul Schrader is like an intelligent person, but sometimes he just says stuff that I'm just like, shut the fuck up.
I think it's just like age.
But,
like, you know, people just
sure.
don't like to, you know, you get to a certain point and you don't like to have your rankings reappraised by
society. Sure, maybe.
Yeah, this was a big sea change.
Yeah.
It's funny too though, because like Paul Schrader is like, I think of him as like, I think I said when I brought him up, like a bomb thrower. So you'd think he'd be a little more into that. Like it's funny when the bomb thrower is like, I want the cannon, you know?
Well, maybe he just wanted to be controversial on his Facebook.
Yeah.
Know?
Maybe. Yeah.
Wanted to start shit. Yeah. I mean, in a way, this is throwing a bomb. I mean, again, like as we talked about, to me, saying, you know, like implying voter fraud is like extremely triggering using distorted woke reappraisal. It's also just, to me, and I know again, like we've been focusing so much on Jeanne Dielman as, you know, kind of this stand-in almost for like all the changes on the poll, but it just feels like just another thing of like, what the fuck do you want from women? Okay, like, you know, we can't be the #1 movie for so long, and now finally this movie by and about a woman is here, and oh no, it was too fast. You know, it just feels like I've heard this argument before about like abortion, about a woman president, about like anything to do with women. So I'm just like, Shut up. Go away, old man.
It's never the right woman, and it's
No.
never the right time. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm just...
Yeah, there's a lot of gatekeeping going on,
Yes.
right?
Gatekeep, girl boss, gaslight.
So that's it for this special episode of the Stereoactive Movie Club. We invite you to join us in our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Stereoactive Movie Club. You can also email us at stereoactivemovieclub@gmail.com. And you can subscribe to the show just about anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you have a moment, please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods, or anywhere else that allows you to do that. It helps others to find the show, and we really appreciate it. Also, you can get updates about this show by following Stereoactive Media on Instagram or Twitter. Thanks for listening.
Stereoactive Movie Club.
This podcast is produced by Stereoactive Media.